I am Daniel Lukis, and welcome to Book 101 Review. And today we're having a Sapha Sunday.
Hello, everybody. I hope you're having a fantastic time today. Whatever time zone you're in, whatever time of day you're in, I hope you have a fantastic, wonderful, and very literary day. I am Sapha
Yes.
Burnell. I'm a cyberpunk and mythpunk author, and we're in Book 101.
Yes, so last month we talked about sci-fi fantasy. Just we want to recap of what we talked about last month with Miss Burnell. And Miss Burnell, what the elements do you think essential for compelling sci-fi fantasy novel?
So, science fantasy novel is a hybrid of science fiction and fantasy. A lot of the times in the sci-fi and the fantasy spheres, that sort of speculative fiction sphere, you're getting this sense of you either have technology or you have magic. And both of those things come together. In science fantasy, a lot of the time you get magic tech. You get that blending and blurring of the lines. Where is this magic coming from? Is it coming from technology? Is it technology coming from magic? How is it being powered? What energy source is the original energy source for things? Usually in science fantasy, it's a little bit less on the mystical and a little bit more on the scientific, but sometimes you can play with those lines like we see with the Force in Star Wars. You can definitely make a case for Star Wars being science fantasy. I know this is something that my friends and I debate a lot, whether Star Wars is science fiction or fantasy, but I think it's science fantasy just because you do have that epic technology. You've got the space opera, you've got all of this, but then you also have the Force. You have this very spiritual kind of thing, especially now with what's going on with the Acolyte, kind of changing the Force a little bit. You're getting the thread going on in there. But I think you can make that case. Science fantasy too, you've got this sense of rationalization and logic in with the supernatural elements. So you don't often get that rationalization, that logic, that very scientific logic, scientific method placed on top of things like magic and supernatural elements in fantasy the way that you do in science fantasy. You also have this contrast with traditional science fiction. Science fiction stories in previous decades have been almost plausible, or you got a lot of pulp, obviously, back at early days, the 1920s going on into the 50s and 60s and into the rise of the B movie and that kind of thing. But science fiction had this sense of plausibility, this sense of we just need to find this one discovery and then we can have these things, Or you're looking at people who studied science and then wrote stories about the extrapolation of what that science, what that technology could mean for the planet. And you've also got a lot of, sort of new wave material, a little bit more postmodern material in science fantasy. Maybe you're playing with the linear style of storytelling versus telling the story with different kinds of sense of time. This is something that happens a lot in punk literature. This is something that I tend to do quite a bit. I love, especially with my cyberpunk books, I love going back and forth from different time periods because I find that you can tell a complete story by kind of having the moments that matter be a little bit more emotionally raw when you're viewing them for the first time in a sequence that will make sense when the book is done. William Gibson tended to do this a lot too with different characters, and then you have these disparate storylines that by the time you get to the end, then you realize where everything was going. So it's definitely wonderfully a thing. Another thing I think with science fantasy that we get, which is not necessarily seen as much in traditional science fiction, is a sense of emotion. More of an emotional appeal, an appeal to the reader's emotional core. You get in science fantasy worlds, there's new sensations and experiences, there's beauty, there's awe, there's terror. There's this sense of a slightly more feminine approach to some things where a lot of the time with early sci-fi, there was a lot more masculine writers than there were feminine. And so you get that that kind of separation of coding there. And it just gives people a little bit more of a light experience on the science rather than hard sci-fi. I know for myself, I tend to be a little bit more hard sci-fi when it comes to Neon Leben at the technology there. I got myself into a little bit of trouble with Neon Leben though, because we were writing it, it came out in 2021 and it was 8 years in development. And the research that I had used to develop the technology states of what would be happening in the 2080s and the 2150s, I was like, oh yeah, that'll happen in the 2080s. And then about 2022 happened and AI went, whoo! And I went,
Boom.
oh, oh no, quantum computing that I'm talking about. Oh my gosh, quartz drives, ruby drives, all of this. I was like, oh, this is like the 2080s. Yeah, this is the main thing that makes Lieben special. It's the special kind of, oh no, the crystalline drive that she's got, and all this stuff. I'm like, oh, now it's here. Oh frick. Research. I have to do more research now to figure out how to put it in there. Oh my gosh. Like son of a
So, Miss Bernal, can you read one of your favorite chapter in Neon Living?
Ooh, I can. Sorry, I had gotten out Cage Wire. So, this is in the Neon Lieben universe. This is a short story that I released called Cage Wire, and it has to do with the main character of Neon Lieben, one of the main characters, Demian Anastas, who we meet in the middle of Neon Lieben. And there is this sense of mystery in Neon Lieben of how Demian came to be in London. What were his secrets? Why was he being so secretive? How did he start developing the technology that he uses on a daily basis? And what draws Lieben to him? And that, was stuff that I was leaving to make sure that we developed it more in Emptiness at the Center, which is the sequel to Neon Lieben coming out later this year. And I wanted to kind of hint to that in Cage Wire, which is available on the anthology Lenses, which you can purchase online in paperback and in digital copy. And I do have an announcement with Cage Wire. We are developing it behind the scenes into a multimedia experience. And so if you want to learn more about Cage Wire and about what we are developing it into, you can go to my website, saphaburnell.com, take a look at my blog, or you can join my Substack at usurperkings.substack.com. And I will have updates on the Cage Wire project and what's going to be happening with that. So I'm going to start with Cage Wire. 2079, London. Demian Anastas pulled the asymmetrical collar of his red leather jacket up the back of his shorn neck. The last of his military haircuts, he promised his reflection. The chill London wind whipped rain sideways to soak his t-shirt. The moisture-wicking properties of neolinen, TM, might have preserved the filtered liquid in a bottom pocket, but the emancipated man still shivered. He rounded a side street on the bustle of Piccadilly Circus. Gritty holograms spackled between triangulated mirrors and unwashed lenses, combated ultra-bright neon emblazoned in a colorful cacophony. Ceruleans and emeralds, electric purples swept so bright his eyes stung, and he grabbed for the mirrored comp glass kept in the thumbprint pocket in his jacket. The lens of the glasses filtered enough light to compensate for the explosions of saturation without casting the rest of the world into a dismal shadow. A timestamp in the lower left corner counted down in ancient Cyrillic numbers. The temperature in the top left, flashes of yellows, oranges, and reds alerted Demian to potential camera angles or stray selfie shots. He searched for a blind spot, a place to wait out the contact. Piccadilly was a visual vaporwave sonata catching up to the boom and thunder imprinted in the rubble of Demian's memories. One hidden earbud buzzed in coded pings to indicate whether he was following the city schematics loaded into his pocket deck. Why meet here in Piccadilly? Secured into the lining of his leather jacket, the pocket deck sat on his lower back, its comfortable hum stunted by the shiver of his wide-eyed dive into Earth's largest, still functional city. The information locked in self-generated encryptions droned in the back of his head. Where was his contact? The person who could take him out of the crowds? The burden of his couriered intel slapped gently against his spine. Electric vehicles whispered by, their wheels barely caressing pavement not broken by mortar or the threads of the military machine he dedicated his adolescence to out of a confounded defiance. Now alive 23, the 8-year conflict began to fill out a frame which still had growing left to do if he survived London, if he gave the algorithms to his contact. As he trotted to the statue of Eros, the silence in the neon holograms arrested the fright he imagined, while strapped into the cargo plane he spent far too much in antiquated currency to board. London was a bastion of muted noise. To the victors across the globe, the fractionalization of countries into multinational interests or ghettos of contractual holdouts originated in the city of London. Hopping up the side of the statue, Demian wondered why he decided London was the place. Self-flagellation? A reticent to let the flag ward settle into the soil, covered by the clockwork push of history? The promise of anonymity in a place older than sin, yet still connected to the pulse of the conglom and its cogs? The thought struck in a basso repeat. People in hot conversation or the pursuit of common living bustled around Eros's plinth. He was 23, and his life began with shudders and the shrapnel of rocket and drone fire. War was his adolescence. In its crushing weight and the din and the chokes for breath not tainted with gunpowder or the sickly smoke of stale air and explosive residues, Demian grew. Now, Demian's choices were his own. He was free, consumed by the glut of light in London town. The noise and clatter sloughed off Demian's bones, collected in the soles of his boots like the rain sagging his shirt. How better to hide 2 streets over from Conglom HQ? Easier to squash a spider if he could see its 8 hairy legs stretch out from the macabre center mass. Trailing around, Demian searched for the green spark which ought to come from his contact's head. The Cyrillic clicked on, time spanning too many breaths. Late. The contact was late. He waited in the street, trotted across the traffic to a drugstore in search of a coffee or hot tea, anything to stave off the chill. Circled round past the tube, busied about the shops with the large windows his glasses could filter through without the cheap holograms taking up too much of his vision. Twice, then thrice, Demian noticed the same people hovering round the same stores. Chatter dotted his earpiece. Terra Epsilon closing in. Backup working on soft kettle charge. He shifted locations at a trot. They were coming closer, but none of them knew him. They knew the contact. He drummed his fingers on his palms, holed up in the drugstore across from a sporting goods shop, selling football jerseys and kicks, watched from behind a paper stand of algae wash kits as 2 of the 3 people started at each other on the sidewalk, hot whispers passing too close for Demian's paranoia to brush off the serendipity. Teeth clenched to halt a hushed whisper, as if urging the contact on was a form of sympathetic magic.
Bravo, Miss Bernal. Bravo, bravo.
I
So
promise the audiobook is better.
so how do you approach world building in Neon Living?
First off, if you would like to see my world building as I do it, I have a World Anvil world dedicated to the Lieben cycle, and you can get to it via saphaburnell.com. There's a link up at the top in the description. Right in the main thing, there's World Anvil right at the top. And I make basically articles that you can see, they're all public, online, of everything that I create, all of the characters, all of the settings, and kind of rabbit trail. So I started off with this idea early in the beginning that I wanted to do a sort of cyberpunk world that eventually developed into a cyberpunk space opera. I knew that this would take place over several novels. I knew this would take place over several hundred years, and that certain characters would kind of age up, age out, and the next generation would take over and take over. Like, that was the initial spark that I started with. And then I was trying to figure out, basically from a psychological and philosophical point of view, what would it look like if there were some incredible AI, of the likes that Elon Musk and others are saying will eventually happen, these general AIs, which are basically sapient machines. And yes, there is a difference between sapience and sentience. I wrote an article about that for Codex magazine, and you can read that on Medium. You can also read that on saphaburnell.com. But what happens if this AI comes? And it is actually altruistic. What happens if it does mean us good? Well, obviously, we as people, we're a fairly paranoid lot. And the idea that some superhuman intelligence, some super existent organism that we can barely fathom, that most of us can't understand, what happens if it does not mean us harm? Does that mean that we will mean it no harm? Does that mean that we'll follow along? Does that mean that we'll kind of join in with it and all that kind of thing? And so that's where I started with this idea of the character of Lieben, this AI which achieves sapience and continues to grow and continues to learn and takes on the sort of mode, the imprinting of a woman. And so she basically calls herself the mother machine, and she basically takes on all of these AI and views them as her children. And she looks at humanity and goes, uh, the kids are being naughty again. Let me take your weapons away. And so the big thing that kind of stems all of what happens in the Lieben cycle is the moment that Lieben goes, no, you can't have these anymore, and takes all of the high-tech weaponry out of human hands. All of it's gone. All the nukes, all of the massive, satellites, everything, all of it's gone. She puts it to the side and goes, you can't have it. And half of humanity is like, you know what? This is actually a pretty good thing. You go to one of Lieben's havens, you get free healthcare, free food, free clothes, free lodging, free everything you need. All she asks is that you contribute and receive. So basically, you do something and you learn how to do it really well. And whether that's art or playing video games or, doing a tap dance or whatever it is, as long as, you dedicate your life to doing something, you're welcome to have all of your needs taken care of. All you have to do is allow them to put a circlet around your wrist, which monitors your behavior and everything else about you. And
Definitely.
part of the humanity is like, you know what? This is a good trade. I know what it's like not to eat. So, the idea that my kid can have a free education in anything they want for as long as they want, and all they have to do is be monitored by a machine. Great, let's do it. The other half of the planet's like, so how do we get our weapons back? Very skeptical. And
Yes.
their solution to it is to create genetically modified super soldiers and to create biological machines that Lieben cannot hack and take away. And so you have this interplay between people accepting grace and accepting gifts and the people who are like, I'm going to do it on my own 2 feet and you can't tell me different. Or who are like, I'm not giving up that control. Because it cannot be good. There's no way that it can actually be good. And so more than anything, I started the world building of Neon Lieben with the idea of what do people do with grace? What do people do with altruism? What actually happens? And then that fractured all of humanity into different groups. And then I could develop those groups. I could see why one group didn't just become like 1 versus 1, why it's 1 versus 7. I could see all of the different kind of subgroups going in there. And then I could start plotting, okay, what characters do I need to develop this? What people do I need to have in this world? Who's talking to me? Who needs to be there? And so in Neon Lieben, it's characters like Dr. Karnak, who is the original creator of Lieben, along with his team, and his protege Baiko, Baiko no Kaho, who was one of the scientists working on Lieben and one of the instrumental people in kind of emancipating Lieben from the company that made her. And you've got characters like Demian, who we see in Cagewire as a young 23-year-old. He's not 23, 2085 when we meet him again in Neon Lieben, but as this young, wide-eyed kid who just finished, fighting in a war. And this is his first night in London. And what does he do with it? And he's got this secret in his pocket, and so that's how I kind of got it started. Of course, knowing that there are certain beats and certain points that you need to have in a cyberpunk work to make it cyberpunk. And so, you've got that cybernetic augmentation, you've got a lot of neon, you've got AI, you've got corporate overlords, and you have the stratification of culture, almost this warren of different smaller groups who are all trying to survive and be rebellious against this massive corporate overlord. You've got all of those basics of the cyberpunk genre, but then I'm going to take those, I'm going to twist them, and I'm going to hit you in the heart.
Definitely. Very well said, Miss Burnell. But before we go on, let's shout out our listeners from New Zealand. Thank you, New Zealand, for supporting this podcast because in Auckland, we got 44% audience share. Wellington, Canterbury, Nelson, Bay of Plenty, Waikato, Tanaki, Sutherland, Northland, Chapman Island, and many more. Thank you so much for supporting this podcast because this podcast is created empower writers, authors all over the world like Miss Sapha Burnell. So, Miss Burnell, what are some of your favorite sci-fi fantasy novels?
Oh, okay. Obviously, I'm a huge cyberpunk fan. So the OG, the absolute OG, is the Sprawl trilogy by William Gibson. You've got Neuromancer, Mona Lisa, Overdrive, and you've got Count Zero. And Count Zero was the novel that got me into cyberpunk in the first place. It was given to me the summer before I got into grade 12 by my English teacher, and I had done grade 12 that summer with them because they were leaving, and so a whole bunch of us were like, "Yeah, we'll do summer school if it means we get you for English 12." And so we did it early because we were nerds. And at the end of it all, we'd watched AI artificial intelligence and discussed it. We had the Red do Android's Dream of Electric Sheep, and We Will Remember It For You Wholesale, and Johnny Mnemonic. And then we'd watch Johnny Mnemonic too, which, okay. Keanu does really good work in a lot of acting. Everyone has a B-day. But at the end of that course, he picked this dog-eared copy of Count Zero off the shelf and went, "I think you'll dig it." And it blew my mind. It blew my mind. I was this sheltered teenager who was, doing classical music and performing Shakespeare and doing all of these, nice, dainty little things, playing hockey and things like that too. But, for the most part, was this kind of girly, la la la. And then all of a sudden you voiced Count Zero upon me, and it's like, oh, I heard the neurofunk just start to dive into my brain. And that was it. I was sold on cyberpunk. Absolutely. I ended up reading everything that William Gibson ever read. Shout out to William Gibson. I believe he may still be in Vancouver, he used to be big on Twitter. I don't know if he still is because it's now X and a lot of things have shuffled, but at Great Dismal. But that really did open things up. I think too, I'm old school when it comes to certain things, like in the fantasy market. Fantastes by George MacDonald. It's from the 1800s, but that was one incredible fantasy novel that really did form a lot of how we view fantasy today. So that is one of my personal favorites. I also love, gosh, it's been a while, but I loved Madeleine L'Engle. So that's another one earlier on. I know it's an older one, but it definitely did mean something. I loved the Clone Wars novels that Star Wars was putting out before they were bought out by Disney. And I'm not going to say anything about the pre or post Disney Star Wars, but back in the day before Disney bought Star Wars and you had the Clone Wars miniseries, the 2D animated one done by Gendy Tarkovsky, and then you had this glut of Clone Wars novels. I used to love them. You've got Clone Troopers with Karen Traviss. Karen Traviss was one of the first ones to really develop Mandalorian culture in a gigantic way, and I absolutely love that. Shout out to Karen Traviss. You're a rock star. Thank you so much for doing what you do. And there were so many ones, including the Cestus Deception and others, that just sort of formed my head when I was reading a lot of science fiction. I also love the science fiction of Peter Watts. Now, this is hard sci-fi. So, you read something like Echopraxia and different things like that. It's a little bit more of a scientific read. But Peter Watts, he's a incredible, incredible author. He's Canadian. And what he does, too, if you want to read a Peter Watts novel, you can go on his website and read the digital editions. And if you like it, buy it as a print book. But he has them available just that you can read them right there on his site. And kudos to that. I wish I could do that kind of thing. Unfortunately, I don't have another income stream other than writing. So I can't afford to offer things for free, but I'll offer the first chapter. I'll say, hey, you know what? I'm the first person to say, go to your local public library if my book's not in it. absolutely ask them to bring it in. I love it when people bring things in through the library. It's fantastic. Absolutely make use of your local public libraries, and that way you can read my books too, and that's the way you can read them for free for you, you know. But Peter Watts, definitely, if you like hard sci-fi, huh, his view on vampires, oh my gosh, it's incredible. I love it. So definitely give those a try.
Highly recommended, people. So, Miss Bernal, how do you balance complex world building with character development in Neon Living?
I always bring it back to the personal interactions. So the thread of what's going on politically is almost a background character. It's a shadow on the wall. It's the painting that you see as you're walking by. It's that kind of thing. But the things that I really cling to are the interactions between the characters. It's Adarastos in chapter 1 of Neon Lieben, rising from the sea, all 8 feet tall of him, walking into a haven, which is, one of Lieben's kind of community center, hospital, education centers, the whole thing. It does it all. Walking through the doors into the hospital and going, oh, everything just sense everything I sense is wrong, and starting to heal the sick. It's the moment that Max Allard really early on, this, I love Max Allard. Okay, the character Max Allard, he in Neon Lieben is this 20-year-old kid who got press ganged into the military to pay his mother's debt. He has no idea how to be a soldier. He has no idea how to do anything but be a mechanic. And so they throw him into engineering and he fixes what needs fixing. He's the guy that fixes your sink. He's the guy that does all the stuff. He's completely harmless. He has no idea how to be a soldier or how to be a Navy man. And he's chosen by Commodore Ramage to go in because you're the most harmless person that I have on this ship. Go get the 8 foot tall super soldier machine to come back out so we can take him and be on our way, so we can put him back in his cage. And the first time that Max sees Adarastos, it's this hush in the crowd. It's this moment where all of a sudden he's looking up and up and up and seeing this guy cure a woman of cancer. And he goes, oh my God, this is a person. This isn't some biological machine. This is a human being. And his nervousness is still there, but he follows Adarastos around. He doesn't use the down phrase, which is supposed to immediately make Adarastos drop. He instead just watches Adarastos as he goes through this hospital, as he goes through this place, laying hands on the sick. And eventually they end up sitting down and having a conversation. And it's about that building of a relationship. It's about that moment of mercy in a very hectic and scary time. It's about what do you do when you realize that you're no longer the most incredible being on the planet. Humanity, it pales in comparison to a being like Adarastos. What do you do with that? And what Max Eller does is let Adarastos show his own character, and then they end up talking about it, and they end up going back. And they go back because Max is like, there's 11 more of you down there. There's 11 more assets. Are you just going to save yourself? And that's it. And that's the bond that really creates the situation where everything else interplays off of it. With Neon Lieben, with the earlier time period, because we play with 2 different timelines in the 2080s, it's Baiko looking for the android that she created with Dr. Karnak. It's her going to other people for help and them kind of going on the side roads of the world, trying to find ways to act and ways to move without being noticed in a world where more and more surveillance is making less possible without being found. And it's about those human connections inside this grandiose, inside, the conglomerate taking over North America. And instead of a passport, you have a company card. It has those elements in it, but without the characters actually gripping and feeling and being emotional and coming together and falling apart, the rest of it doesn't work, because you can have incredible world building and there's incredible worlds built out there, but the more fanciful you make your world, the more I truly believe you need to make sure that your characters are emotionally human. They don't have to be physically human, but emotionally human in order to attach the reader to something familiar so they will go down those fantastic roads.
Definitely, for sure. But before we go on, Miss Bernal, I'm inviting you to please do listen to my other podcast, Food 101, our fourth season with Chef Alessandro, one of the specialty chef in one of the five-star hotel in downtown Toronto. Please do listen to our latest episode. We talk about one of the Japanese favorite in the kitchen, favorite ingredients. Dashi dashi people. So please do listen. Food 101. So Miss Bernal, can you please invite our listeners to support all your works and books?
Everybody, thank you so much for listening today. Thank you so much for being part of Book 101. It is incredible to be able to do this and to be able to be here with Mr. Lucas and enjoy Sapha Sundays when we can. You can go to my website, saphapurnell.com or .ca, depending on where you are. That is SAPHABURNELL.com or .ca. And there you can see my poetry with Usurper Kings. You can see the Judge of Mystics saga, which is my Mythpunk series, with Charanash, Son of Abel, Whiskey and Sinner's Blood, Book of Revels. You can also see my cyberpunk work as within Neon Lieben, Cagewire, and the Cottonmouth Smile. You can get my blog. You can look at the Beautiful Machines blog. You could also go to my Substack at usurperkings.substack.com. Join for free, or, there's a few extras there if you do join as a paying member. And then you can also see my articles, a lot of my philosophical work, a lot of the work that I do to kind of prepare. And I write articles about my research, what I'm doing, researching both in mythology and in the ethics of transhumanism and the ethics of artificial intelligence. Those are on my Substack and also on my Medium. And you can read my books. You can listen to the audiobooks as they're coming out. You can go to my World Anvil site and take a look at the world building articles. If you want to see how I build a world, you can just click on saphapurnell.com, and then right at the top navigation, there is something called World Anvil. If you click on that, you will go to my World Anvil site, where you can see both the Judge of Mystics saga and the Lieben cycle, all of the different articles and the vibes, the incredible vaporwave sort of vibe of my Lieben cycle world. And you can learn more about my characters like Adarastos, like Max Allard, and like Lieben. Lots of ways. Lots of ways. I'm also
Lots of
going to be
ways.
streaming on Twitch. I'm going to be part of 100 Hours of Writing, Oh How. This coming weekend, there is a 100 Hours of Writing event going on Twitch, and you will see me at Usurper Kings on Twitch. So give me a follow over there. And we're going to be doing a 2-hour time slot of writing sprints and talking about critiquing and talking about developing short stories. So absolutely hit me up over there. You can also hit up some of my workshops, like the Condense workshop, and learn more about writing as you go.
Yes, people, let's support Miss Sapha Bernal, because if we support her, more books to come. And looking forward for Ginangagap.
It's going to be so good. I'm
Yes.
looking forward to it.
And yes, thank you, Listen Notes, for our latest score of 27 and belong to 10% popular show globally. Thank you so much. So, Miss Bernal, thank you for your time.
And thank you for yours. Have a great day.
Have a great day, people.
Thanks.
More to come.